Hello and welcome. Today we're taking you on a fascinating journey back in time to the days of Thomas Jefferson, where a well-educated person was someone who had read 50 well-chosen books. But times have certainly changed. In our modern world, information is abundant, and the challenge lies in choosing what to focus on. Imagine this: more than 1,000 books on business published in just 2 years. Harvard's library now contains 8 million books. With an avalanche of information being produced every minute, how can we make the best use of our limited time and resources? The answer lies in selectivity. It's not about reading everything. It's about developing judgment to choose what truly matters to you. We'll explore this concept and more in this video. But first, if you find this topic intriguing and want more thought-provoking content like this, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for regular updates. Your support means the world to us. Now let's dive into the incredible world of selective learning and the power of your imagination, by Earl Nightingale.
Back in the days of Thomas Jefferson, a person who had read 50 well-chosen books could consider himself well-educated. To give you an idea of how times have changed, take the plight of the business executive today. Within the past 2 years, more than 1,000 books have been published on the subject of business alone, to say nothing of the massive flow of magazines, newsletters, digests, research report films, tapes, and other media. 100 years ago, the largest college library at Harvard contained 212,000 volumes. The next largest at Yale had 95,000. Today, Harvard's library contains 8 million books, and Yale's more than 5 million. It's estimated that some 2,000-odd pages of print are being produced each minute. It's become a veritable avalanche. Even assuming a man reads about 3 books a week during a reading lifetime of 50 years, he cannot possibly read more than 1/25th of 1% of the world's books, no matter how accessible they might be. So what's the answer? It's selectivity. As we look at the sum of the world's knowledge, we see that the most valuable thing an education can give us is not mere learning, for that must always be severely limited, but judgment, which allows us to choose and select and compare and fit together the fragments of knowledge we're able to accumulate, the kind of knowledge we want and need for whatever it is we want to learn and do. Part of the solution lies in improved storage and retrieval systems, computerized catalogs, microfilms, electronic indices. Using modern methods, a printed page can be reduced in size to 1/1000th, so that an entire book can be printed on an ordinary catalog card. And that's only the beginning. Devices now exist that can reduce a page's area as much as 1,000,000 times, so that a whole sheet of data can be put onto a microdot small enough to be pasted inconspicuously on top of an ordinary comma. And in the near future, using an electron microscope and tiny dots of metal film, we'll be able to store 1,000 books of 500 pages each on an area no larger than the proverbial head of a pin. Soon micro-libraries will become feasible. All the world's books can then be put on a desktop or in a single cabinet. The living room or den archive will become commonplace. But the problem of time remains. Even if you had all the books in your living room, reading then would still be impossible. So no matter what system comes along, it's still a matter of selection. It's still a matter of finding what you're interested in and then getting the best books and other material available for your subjects. This also demands a kind of ruthlessness the average person finds hard to muster, if he understands the problem at all. He must force himself not to read any part of the mountain of material that does not contribute to his real interest, and that's tough. And now, a moment for this message. I don't mean that we should no longer read for pure enjoyment, far from it. But since we can read only the barest fraction of the material available, we need to learn to be highly selective if we're interested at all in keeping abreast of the times. Thank you. It's been said that every man is the son of his own works. One of my favorite poets is Edgar Allan Poe, and his own life was as bizarre as his tales. His own life story is the story of an author of fantastic imagination, a brilliant editor and critic, a poet tender and cruel, an alcoholic gambler, and debt-ridden neurotic. Poe's parents were strolling players, both of whom died before he was 2 years old, leaving 3 penniless children, William, Rosalie, and Edgar. William became insane, and Rosalie died young. Far more fortunate, Edgar was adopted by a wealthy merchant, John Allen, from whom he took his second name. Heir to a fortune, he was brought up in opulent tradition, and at the age of 17 was sent to the University of Virginia. It was there that Poe came into his tragic self. He drank and gambled himself hopelessly into debt. He was withdrawn from school, disowned by his foster parents, and because he now was no longer heir to the Allen fortune, his fiancée's parents persuaded their daughter, Elmira, to marry a more affluent man. After a 2-year enlistment in the Army, Poe moved to Baltimore to live with Aunt Maria Clem and her daughter, Virginia. There he somehow wrangled enough money to pay a Boston printer to publish some of his poems, and at the same time maneuvered himself into an appointment at West Point. The publishing of his poems was a literary and financial flop, the appointment a disaster. After 1 year, he was dismissed from the Academy for gross neglect of duty and disobedience. Poe's marriage to his cousin Virginia was equally a disaster. To begin with, he was 26 and an alcoholic, while she was a pale and sickly child of 13. The poor girl, though she witnessed some of her husband's finest hours, fell victim to most of his worst. His reckless living and squandering brought her mostly poverty and suffering for 8 years, and finally death, due, it was said, to malnutrition. The bright spots of Poe's life were his days as a magazine editor, contributor, and critic. As editor and critic for the Southern Literary Messenger, he brilliantly tore apart many of his contemporaries and their insipid works. His own crowning work, The Fall of the House of Usher, was published. The Bottle and Debt cropped up again and again, almost as hurdles between a series of magazine associations. The highlight of this period was the publication and enthusiastic reception of his great poem, The Raven. Poe became a social lion, but financially he received only about $10 for the work. His tragic end started on a note of happiness. Learning that Elmira, his youthful sweetheart, had been widowed, he proposed to her, and she accepted. Happily en route to Richmond for the wedding, he stopped off at Baltimore and just disappeared. And now, a moment for this man. Nobody knows what happened to Poe in Baltimore. He simply disappeared and was found a few days later in a pitiful drugged condition. It was all over. He died of a violent brain fever, and John Donne, the great English poet and clergyman who lived at the turn of the 17th century, wrote, "Our creatures are our thoughts, creatures that are born giants. My thoughts reach all, comprehend all. Inexplicable mystery. I, their creator, am in a close prison, in a sick bed, anywhere. And any one of my creatures, my thought, is with the sun and beyond the sun, overtakes the sun, and overgoes the sun in one pace, one step everywhere." Few of us appreciate the great gift of thought. In an instant you can be anywhere, experience anything through the miracle of your thought. A man thousands of miles from home can, in his mind, be with his family in a millisecond. As John Donne indicated, we're in a close prison in our bodies, and restricted to be in one place at a time, physically, even in a sickbed. But any one of our thoughts can be with the sun and beyond, can go anywhere, experience anything. The more you think about it, the more magical it becomes. I think some people have a more highly developed imagination than others. As children, we all have the wondrous ability to bring interest, adventure, and a whole world of excitement into our lives. Have you ever stood just outside the door of a small child's room and listened to him or her at play? It's wonderful. Jabbering away to his imaginary playmate or teddy bear or doll, and the sound effects a small boy can make as he plays with his toys tell you what world he's living in at the moment. As we grow older, we tend to put away the exciting world of imagination, except for the highly creative person. He keeps it alive. It changes, but remains a vital part of his existence. A vivid imagination can be a blessing to the sick and incapacitated. They can travel to the ends of the earth with complete enjoyment, with none of the exasperations and lost baggage and language problems and waiting boredom that is so often a part of real travel. People can be enjoyed without argument or disappointment. It's reported that disadvantaged children often live so much in their imaginations that as they grow older they fail to take advantage of opportunities which exist in the real world. They wake up in so bleak and forbidding an environment that they immediately escape into the world of fantasy and remain there during all of their waking hours. Man would not be man if his dreams did not exceed his grasp. And the dream, the imagined better world that becomes a goal instead of mere fantasy and escape, can and does become the real world. It's the imagined world of the future that keeps the student at his books, the workman at his job, the wife at her housework. It's what makes the driver mount the cab of his truck and the surgeon scrub up for another operation, and the salesman make another call. The imagination is man's most precious gift, and it's with us every day of our lives. Maybe that's why we sort of tend to take it for granted. Now, just a moment for this message. Our creatures are our thoughts, creatures that are born giants. My thoughts reach all, comprehend all. Inexplicable mystery. And what you find yourself imagining most is the key to your future. You ever get mixed up with the pronouns I and me? Millions of people do. You find yourself saying, why don't you come with John and I, when you should say, why don't you come with John and me? If you find yourself making this common error, and others in English, let me recommend a good book for you, written by Bergen Evans, one of the country's best-known authorities on English, and published by Random House. It's titled Comfortable Words. On this particular problem, Bergen Evans has this to say. We often hear, he gave it to John and I. The grossness of the error is made clear if the recipients are put into separate sentences. He gave it to I would surely grate on any ear. The construction, which is common among the half-educated but is never heard among the educated or the uneducated, seems to have had its origin in a fear of the word me in combination with another pronoun. Possibly those who use the gave it to John and I construction had been furiously rebuked or savagely derided in their childhood for saying John and me did this or that. Someone shouted John and I at them or made them stay after school and write John and I on the blackboard 200 times, and John and I it thereupon became in all circumstances. Certainly many middle-class Americans seem afraid of the word me. Some panic-stricken say he gave it to John and I. Others use the equally ghastly, less incorrect, but more affected and self-conscious, he gave it to John and myself. So then the trick is, if you are troubled by this one, to say the sentence first mentally and leave the other person out of it. To yourself say, he gave it to me. Then aloud say, he gave it to John and me. Another common error is found in the misuse of the contraction don't. It stands for the words do not, and it is considered substandard to use it for the words does not. If you mean does not, say doesn't, as in the sentence, it doesn't make any difference. You wouldn't say it do not make any difference. And did you ever wonder why the word Mayday is used as the international distress call? It comes from two French words, Mayday, meaning help me. Another word frequently misused is livid. Livid and vivid are almost exact opposites. Yet they are frequently confused. Livid is a particularly gruesome shade of blue, a leaden gray tinged with blue. It's the color of corpses and bruises. Etymologically, it's related to lavender, and synonyms are pale, wan, ashen. Vivid means vigorous, intense, brilliant, bright-colored. It comes from the Latin word meaning to live, and it's related to vivacious, and its synonyms are clear, lucid, bright. If you like the English language, get the book Comfortable Words by Bergen Evans. Make sure the kids read it too. It can do a lot for their grades in school. And now, a moment for this message. To be able to effectively communicate with others is a priceless asset, and it's one any person can acquire. Do you know that goodbye is a slurred contraction of God be with you? Once upon a time, there was a man who felt he'd reached the end of his rope. It seemed that all the interest had suddenly vanished from his life. His creative wells had seemingly dried up. He still had his work, but it suddenly seemed meaningless to him. Even his family and his home receded darkly in his mind. And finally, nearing the point of desperation, he went to see his old friend, the family doctor. The doctor listened to his story, saw the depths of his depression, and then asked him, when you were a child, what did you like to do best? I like to visit the seashore. All right, the doctor said, you must do exactly as I tell you. I want you to spend all day tomorrow at the shore. Find a lonely stretch of beach and spend the entire day there from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Take nothing to read and do nothing calculated to distract you in any way. I'm going to give you 4 prescriptions in order. Take the first at 9, the second at 12 noon, the third at 3 o'clock, and the last at 6. Don't look at them now. Wait until you arrive at the shore tomorrow morning. Well, the man promised he'd take the doctor's advice, and the next morning, a little before 9, he parked his car on a lonely stretch of beach. There was a strong wind blowing in from the sea, and the surf was high and pounding. He walked to a sand dune near the seething surf and sat down. He took out prescription number 1, opened it, and read it. It said, listen. That was all that was written on it, the one word, listen. And so for 3 hours, that's all he did. He listened to the sound of the buffeting wind and the lonely cries of the gulls. He listened to the sound of the booming surf. He sat quietly, and he listened. At noon, he read the second prescription. It said simply, reach back. And so for the next 3 hours, he did just that. He let his mind go back as far as it could go, and he thought of all the incidents of his life he could remember, the happy times, the good times, the struggles, and the successes. At 3 o'clock, he tore open the third prescription. It read, "Re-examine your motives." And this took so much intense thought and concentration that the remaining 3 hours slipped quickly by. For 3 hours, he re-examined his motives, his reasons for living and moving closer to fulfillment. He clarified and restated his goals. And at 6 o'clock, under a gray, darkening sky and with a taste of salt spray on the wind, he read the fourth and final prescription. It read, "Write your worries in the sand." There had been one thing that had been worrying him particularly, so he walked to the hard sand and with a stick wrote this worry in the sand and stood looking at it for a moment. Then as he walked toward where his car was parked, he looked back and saw that the incoming tide had already erased his worry. He then got in his car and drove homeward. And now, a moment for this message. My old friend Norman Vincent Peale told me that story many years ago about the man, the seashore, and the 4 prescriptions. Listen, reach back, re-examine your motives, and then write your worries in the sand. Money. It's great stuff, but does it make you happy? I read an interesting story in Forbes magazine about 3 young men, all in their middle to late 30s, who had formed a successful electronics firm and sold out to a much larger company for several millions of dollars, making each of the 3 quite rich. Each of them was asked by the Forbes reporter, "Has this wealth and the leisure, the opportunity to now do anything you want to do, made you happy?" In each case, the answer was no. I know that sounds ridiculous to many, but it's true all the same. The proof that it is true is that each of the 3 young millionaires soon went right back to work to start all over again. One of them, in the style of Thomas Edison, sleeps in his lab on an air mattress so as to never be far away from his work. They all tried the life of leisure, and they all gave it up as an unhappy, unfulfilling, unrewarding, and boring form of existence. They found that they were happiest when they were working hardest to achieve the success and riches they finally won and then didn't want. One of them said that he and his wife decorated their home and spent too much money doing it. Another sailed a new boat to Europe in the transatlantic race. Another bought an expensive sports car, but soon they were all back at work. 3 out of 3, 100%. It should tell us something. It reminded me again of Irving Kristol's comment in the New York Times Magazine. He said, "Being frustrated is disagreeable, but the real disasters in life begin when you get what you want." He was referring to something quite different, but the same philosophy all too often applies to a person and his goals. The other night at a dinner party, I met an old friend whom I hadn't seen in some time. He had recently retired and is quite well-to-do financially. I asked him how he likes his retirement, and he said, "It's awful. We've gone all over the country fishing. The rest of the time I've been working in my garden, and I'm going crazy without enough to do. I want a job. I'll even work for nothing." Later, my wife told me that his wife had told her privately that if her husband doesn't find something soon that can occupy 4 or 5 hours a day of his time, he wasn't the only one that was going to lose his mind. She was going to lose hers too. So man strives all his working career for leisure and financial security, and when he gets it, he's miserable. With the 3 young millionaires, it wasn't so bad. They could go right back to work again. With my retired friend, that isn't so easy. The answer? It's to understand in advance that we need something interesting in which we can busy ourselves for a good part of our days. Time off is fine if you have something to come back to, something that needs to be done and which you enjoy doing. Understanding this in advance, we can plan in advance. We can make sure we develop an avocation that will keep us in the stream of things, keep us busy as much as we want to be busy after we retire. The story of the 3 young millionaires proves we need it. And now, a moment for this message. So what's your avocation? What are you going to be able to lose yourself in when you have more time on your hands? Better start planning for it now. Leisure time and people just don't seem to get on well together. Thank you.